Every year I filled out my March Madness bracket. I was never a huge basketball fan, but to fit into the buzz that filled my high school every year about who would be the next champion always made me just curious enough to do a little bit of research. Every year I just guessed Duke would come out on top, and some years that worked out for me, and others it didn't. Honestly, I really didn't care. I didn't realize this competition raked in $1 billion, almost $1 billion, for the NCAA every year, however. Since recently becoming a collegiate athlete and playing for our SIUE softball team and seeing the inner workings of how these teams are ran and how they compete with each other, I became almost upset about the amount of money that was being made and not a single penny of it was going towards the athletes. Athletes work so tremendously hard in the weight room, on the field, in the classroom, to play on the biggest stages in the world, and they should be compensated for that, for more than just getting their college and maybe a few fees paid for. Student athletes should be able to be paid because they do not have time for a job, they bring in a lot of revenue for both their school and the NCAA, and because they should be able to profit off their name, image, and likeness, even though they are not able to do that currently. So, even though I think that student athletes should get paid, some college students and other people believe that student athletes should not be paid because they're already getting tuition money and other college expenses paid for, such as some of their meals and their housing. While it may seem like all of the athletes have their expenses paid for, only 0.3% of university students receive a full ride scholarship, according to the Next College Student Athlete. That's a site known for helping teenagers get recruited into college programs. And some people believe that athletes are babied and they're handed everything. They're known for their free clothes, walking around matching and everything, the shoes, the coats, and that just really upsets people and makes people think that they shouldn't get any extra money. And many people do not realize that student athletes work so tremendously hard to represent their school, and it makes them believe that they should not be paid because they don't see the work that's done behind closed doors. I believe that student athletes put a majority of their time into their schoolwork and improving at their sport, and it makes it really hard for them to get a job, and I've had personal experience with this. Student athletes have busy schedules that prohibit them from getting jobs. Their schedules differ so much week to week, and even if they did have time, companies and businesses do not like to hire them because their hours can differentiate each week, depending on practice schedules and travel and different games and stuff. I've felt this firsthand. I've been passed up many jobs that I was beyond qualified for it just because I didn't have a certain day of the weekend off. And even though school does pay for their tuition and housing expenses most of the time, a job would be nice to cover the other expenses like food and anything, just having fun money. It's a lot of financial burden to kind of live your college life while spending money but not being able to make it themselves. And allowing college athletes to be paid is supported by more than half of college students, shown in a survey conducted by College Pulse, as stated by Abigail Hess. She also explains that 71% of collegiate athletes believe they should be paid for their time and effort put into representing their university. Furthermore, I believe that the NCAA and each individual school profit an amazing amount off of their players, and it kind of upsets me that players see none of those benefits. The most prime example of the NCAA profiting off their athletes is the March Madness basketball tournament. According to Darren Yeater, a writer for CNBC, the March Madness tournament makes $800 million each year through television deals alone. This tournament funds nearly 75% of the NCAA. That's just an amazing amount of money that not a single penny is seen by the athletes. Even though March Madness does bring in $800 million a year, the individual schools profit quite a bit from their athletes. According to the Associated Press, college sports programs took in $14 billion in 2018 through ticket sales, television contracts, apparel deals, and merchandise sales. Tickets for the game in which Zion's Nike shoe blew out sold for $4,000 each, with revenue going back to participating schools. Just imagine a full stadium, and each person paid $4,000. That's a lot of money going to these schools and not to the athletes. All the money is due to the athletes that play. No one's going to pay $4,000 to watch an empty court. All of this money is due to these athletes that show up every day, day in, day out, to impress these fans and bring them to the stadiums. Student athletes should also be able to use their own image to make a profit. So not only should the schools pay them, they should be able to advertise themselves to make money on their own. So universities use these athletes' images to bring in the money, but they cannot use it themselves. In an article, Steve Berkowitz explains the proposed Division I rule changes that would allow for athletes to profit off their image. So in this rule change, athletes would be able to use their name, image, and likeness to promote athletically and non-athletically business-related activities. So they would be able to promote themselves by doing lessons and saying, I am a softball player at SIUE, for example. They'd be able to promote themselves by saying, I'm a basketball player at Duke. This would just change the game tremendously, considering then they will be able to advertise themselves and make their own money on the side of their sport. In my own experience, I had to shut down one of my only forms of income because I was promoting the clothing I was selling online. I ran a Depop shop, it's an online clothing store, and I thrifted and flipped clothes, and I was modeling them myself. So I had to close down my shop only because I was using my image to promote something to give myself money, and that was against the NCAA rules. So that was my only form of income at the time. So I can't get a job in person because I don't have enough time. And I also cannot sell clothes online, which is not very time consuming at all and an easy way for me to make myself side money. I had to shut that down completely. So I think that college athletes should be able to make money off their image. Furthermore, I think that not online only, apparel stores really profit off of the college athletes that they put into their clothing. For example, quite a few people were watching the UNC Duke basketball game in which Zion Williamson blew out his Nike shoe. It's a pretty famous incident. It was less than a minute into the game. And this Nike shoe breaking caused a 1.37% decrease in the Nike stock overnight, and that just shows how influential college athletes and what they're wearing is to these markets. And even though that's a negative, usually it's positive. I know for sure that the Oregon softball team, their uniforms look amazing and they're done by Nike, and that it brings a lot of people to want to buy more Nike softball apparel, and they are kind of new into the softball market. And I think that just seeing these athletes and looking up to these athletes makes you really want to wear what they're wearing and buy. And so these programs profit quite a bit off of what they're putting their athletes in. So in conclusion, I think that college athletes should be compensated for their hard work. You don't see half of what they're doing. They are going in early mornings before the sun even comes up, lifting, running, jumping, anything you could think of. They are competing day in and day out at practice for a spot on the field, playing the sport they love. And I just think that there's just not enough time in the day for athletes to put in the work that they need to represent their school in a positive way, and also get a job to support themselves on the side. Living expenses are so expensive these days, and I just think that college athletes need to be paid or should be able to use their image to make money.